G'day legends, I hope that you're all well. And today we're going to go over really some artillery duels. We're going to go over the map first, and then we're going to look at some new aid packages to Ukraine and what that will mean, as well as the news of Ukrainian membership into the European Union. Now, I know there will be a few things I'll miss today because there's been a lot happen, but let's start on the map. And we're over here on the deep state map. Now, the first thing I want to go over, and this is only alleged, is of massive artillery duels from Russian-controlled territory in Kherson into Ukrainian-held territory on the other bank of the Dnieper River. Now, apparently in this, Russia is claiming they killed at least one HIMARS and some other artillery systems, and that over the past day or two, there was a small boats attack from Ukraine across the Dnieper River at some point here. Now, we have actually seen small boats used before, and I can verify this because I knew some of the foreign guys who were part of this. Although he said that the attack was quickly spoiled, he thinks by some sort of insider, because and this was a few months ago, they left somewhere across this bank of Dnieper towards in Ernadha here. This is the nuclear power plant. Now, if you've seen the photo of me reporting on that, I was about here somewhere. But they left on a small boat to try and attack that a few months ago. And he said as soon as they sort of got out into the water, they heard a Russian attack helicopter spool up, and there was, then photos released by Russian sources of people dead in the water. And although they do say they did land on the other bank, that attack was quickly spoiled. Now, something else we're going to look at, and as always, we're going to go over a few different maps, so bear with me here, is in Vuhledar, this operational encirclement. And although none of the maps are showing much progress, no one is really stepping back here. The deployment maps show that Russia is deploying more forces in this region. As you can see on this map, that Russia has got the 40th Marines, 36th Motorized Battle, and the 155 Marines. Now, something you need to take, all these maps have some level of narrative, some agenda, so take everything with a grain of salt. But this operational encirclement, as you can see here, to try and encircle here and make the Ukrainians step back. I've talked about why this is important due to the train lines into Donetsk before. But these assessments are in line with the ISW, the Institute of War's assessment, that Russia is deploying more ground forces in this direction. Now, something I do want to talk about is in Bilahovka, which is just above Seversk, which is losing some amount of ground. Now, something we can see as well is that pushing in, Seversk is here, and we have seen, this almost, and it's probably a long time off, but some level of try and encirclement of this region, and I would suggest in an attempt to cut off this region and to make the front line shorter. One of the biggest problems both sides have had is how long the front line is, and if you can shorten this front line, it gives a lot of advantages for your attacking, your artillery, everything. But in here at Bilahovka, over the last hour or so, we have seen some advancement. So you can see just north of here, you can see that the Russians have taken a large plot of land here and have pushed through. But there is some more interesting bits in this. So as we move from here up into Kremenar, you can see how far in this front line is from the Russians. And you can see that has moved only in the last couple of days, only a little bit. But some sources are saying that it has pushed in further. So if we go to the live UA maps, which again is the most commonly used map and in many ways the most trusted map. So if we come in on Seversk, so if we look at where from Kremenar, where Liman is, let's say they're maybe a sixth or a fifth of the way. But if we go back to the deep state, it looks a fair bit further in. But something interesting on this map is further to the north, there is this icon. And this icon is showing, gunfire in this vicinity, just northwest of Kremenar, nowhere near where they have their border showing where the Russian held territory is. But then if we go back to the interactive map, it is showing significantly claimed Russian-controlled territory all the way from Kremenar, all the way into Torsky here, almost near, and if we take as a key point this waterway, all the way up into this region is what Russians are claiming of their control. So it's very difficult to see what this actually is between these maps, because then it would mean this map too is more correct but somewhat incorrect. But like I say, it's only claimed territory they control. And at the end of the day, all these maps have their own level of agenda, and everything has its own narrative without being as unbiased as possible. And as well on the deployment map, we can see here near Kremenar these units of the Russian motorised regiment, motorised divisions, and the Ukrainian divisions here. So as always, let's push down into Bakhmut and have a look at this region, as this region is where, if things are really going to start changing quickly for any side and have a massive effect, this is really where we've seen the bulk of the fighting. And we'll go back a day, and as you can see in the last real 2 days, there has been some Russian advance up to the north of Soledar, but over the last day or so, not too much in and around Bakhmut. Although on the deployment map, you will then see just the amount of forces that are in this region. So you can just see how many Ukrainian forces, and also, Russia's Wagner group. Now, I believe this map is somewhat incorrect, because I have reports from people there that are saying the Russian VDV, who are the paratroopers, are also now in this area, replacing some of the Russian Wagner group. And the Air Assault Brigade, that may be the VDV, I'm unsure. But again, let's have a look at now the Russian state map and see what they're saying. So they are saying, and this is blurry, I'm sorry, this is the best level I can get. They are showing fairly into the city here, down this waterway. Let's have a look at this sort of northeastern side. They're claiming here that they're pushing right onto this waterway. So let's have a look on the deep state map. And I believe that area is about here somewhere. So the Russian map is saying that they are all the way up into here on this river, where this map is showing back here. So it's probably somewhere in between. Let's look at the live UA map. The live UA map tends to be more on the Ukrainian side of this. So, well, it is showing much further in here for the Russians, to the northeast of Bakhmut. So let's look at the deep state. So it's showing in here somewhere. Now that has surprised me a lot. So it looks like maybe the deep state hasn't been updated, and this map by Live UA is pushed more in here. And remember, Live UA is normally very conservative towards any Russian gain. So let's have a quick look on the ISW map in Bakhmut. And the ISW map, the ISW map also is not showing that gain. So it is a very hard situation to get a grasp of. We don't really know where that front line is, but it is difficult. And that is, basically the updates of what is happening on the front line. There's been a lot of artillery duels, a lot of fighting in and around Bakhmut. There's been another American civilian killed who was doing evacuations from Russian artillery. It's just all a very hard situation. So that'll end our mapping for today. Something I wanted to really say was, it was actually 1 year ago today that I arrived in Ukraine, just a month before the start of the war. And that didn't help me too much, because it seemingly added up too well, and that brought into a lot of people, at least initially, thinking that I was some sort of spy on either side, which I'd be a lot better paid, I guess, if I was. I don't know what spies get paid, but I'm guessing it's good. But realistically, I went there because I didn't understand the situation that was happening, but I believed something may spike up and happen. And realistically, I went there wanting to know the truth and wanted to know where this lie. And, it's now a year down the track for me, and almost a year into this invasion, and it will be a year on the Feb 24th, so in 20 days. And realistically, I feel like I'm further from knowing what's going on than when I arrived there day one. The more you know, the less you know in many ways. Now, during a joint press conference with the European Union leadership, President Zelensky has said, quote, he won't hand over Bakhmut, and he continues to say, we will fight as long as we can. Although Ukrainian's defense intelligence once again issues a warning that Russia is deploying more assault groups in the Donetsk region for a likely upcoming offensive to capture the Donbass. Now, we pretty much know that that offensive is so likely to go ahead. We're seeing every indication of saying that. We're seeing 99% of, the intelligence community and the media saying that is going to happen. Although the media love to kick up things like that because it gets them clicks, it gets them videos. And Like, I know as well that if that happens, it will be then easier for me to create content. So it's working in that industry. It's terrible because people want the worst for the best story, if that makes sense. So it's very difficult to believe some of the media because, of course, the media has an agenda as well, especially the big media. Their agenda needs to, satisfy shareholders and owners and pay all this. So interesting. Zelensky has continued to say, our task is not to give them this opportunity until our army is strengthened with appropriate weapons, and I think we have a chance. Although through unofficial channels on both sides, they're both saying that there's so many losses in the Bakhmut area that they want to continue fighting there because they're weakening the other side dramatically, and that the Ukrainians won't step back and the Russians won't step forward because they believe they're killing so many that it's weakening any further offensives. And that's such a tough situation because if both sides are telling the truth and they're killing so many people, well, the human life lost in that region is going to be just absolutely dramatic. And we know that it is absolutely shocking, the amount of human life lost in that region. But if both sides are saying it's just wearing down, well, we don't know where that leads to either side's upcoming offensive if they've just thrown men into a meat grinder in an attempt to try and bleed out the other side. Not really sure, but you have to remember when presidents, when people like this, including from Kiev or the Kremlin, it doesn't matter, when those sides are saying, our men will continue to fight and this and that, it may be a lot easier to sit there and say, we will continue to fight from, within the capital. Although we've seen both sides videos of people on the front line saying that we need more support and that it's absolutely horrific conditions. Also, in an historic moment, over a dozen top European Union officials have arrived in Kiev to attend the Ukrainian-European Union summit. We all know that Kiev government's goal is to eventually enter the EU and NATO, with support from the Ukrainian populace going from single figures to now the majority since 2014. That has been rising. Ukraine officially applied for EU membership late February, only days after the start of the full-scale invasion, and then it gained its candidacy status in June. This is like the next step forward. But for example, Turkey has been a candidate since 1999, North Macedonia since 2005, Montenegro 2010, and Serbia since 2012. So we can see that there are countries on this list that have been in that candidacy status for decades. French President Macron has said that it could potentially be decades, but the EU has said that Ukraine needs to establish a credible track record to curb corruption and to speed up its long-withstanding judicial reforms, which we have seen a lot of Ukrainian officials recently been outed and charged under corruption. But what does Ukraine actually need to do to get into the EU? A lot of media is saying that they're in and this and that, and it's all over the place. So from Reuters, we've seen that Ukraine needs to fulfill an extensive criteria from political stability, including democratic institutions, guaranteeing the respect of the rule of law and human rights to economic ability to withstand more competition. Accession criteria do not specifically say that a country at war cannot become an EU member, but the bloc does not want to import any territorial conflicts. Now, this is something which I would have been incorrect on if I didn't research this. I thought that no country could enter the EU while it had a territorial dispute. Now, this says that is incorrect, but of course, a country with a territorial dispute does raise a whole nother bunch of questions and a whole nother bunch of problems. But I think we all know that until this war is finished and the borders are settled, whether it's Ukrainians' pre-2014 borders or somewhere else, we're not sure, the likelihood of the entry is fairly low. Because if they were to be accepted, well, then the countries within the EU take on so much more responsibility. And something that is, part of that is all EU countries must agree to take a new peer in. Now, beyond Ukraine meeting what they say is a complex criteria, it would need to overcome reluctance from several founding states, including France and the Netherlands, to expand the bloc further east. And this was, part of Russia's issue, especially with Poland getting in. And before this war, with Ukraine looking into options with NATO, that was what Russia was saying was, part of the Minsk agreements, these other agreements, is that NATO and the EU would not move further east. But also from the EU website, any country that satisfies the conditions for membership can apply. These conditions are known as the Copenhagen criteria and include a stable democracy and the rule of law, a functioning market economy, and the acceptance of all European Union legislation, including of the euro. And this is something that I found interesting because there are definitely countries within the EU who don't use the euro as money. But what it's sounding like to me, and I couldn't really find any good information on this, is that new countries need to adopt the euro. Now, we know that Ukraine, compared to other countries in Europe, is a very poor country. How would we see that actually come into effect? I'm not really sure. As well as some of the issues may be the amount of money that needs to rebuild Ukraine after this war, which, other EU members are saying that Russia should pay for. Is Russia going to pay for it? Well, Mexico didn't pay for the wall, so we don't really know. But there's going to be a massive financial burden on that, and this could be part of the negotiations. But all countries need to meet this Copenhagen criteria. And all countries willing to join also have to have a stable institution guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, the respect for and protection of minorities. And this is something we've seen many times actually breached in Ukraine as well. To what extent? Well, I'm not willing to comment on that because, I can't verify any of this, but been targeted attacks against minorities. And this was one of Russia's main arguing points of the initial invasion. Also, continue a functioning market economy and the capacity to cope with competition and market forces in the EU. The ability to take on and implement effectively the obligations of membership, including the adherence and the aims of political, economic, and monetary union. And this is difficult because all countries in the EU need to say yes. And there might be a lot of countries typically now going, yeah, we support this and that, until it comes down to that last vote. We're not 100% sure how that will look. America has announced a $2.17 billion new package to Ukraine. This is actually including the long-range ground-launched small-diameter bomb, also known as the GLSDB. These are missiles the US has provided for the HIMARS rocket system. These have a new range of 94 miles or 151 kilometers, which basically doubles what Ukraine had before in those launches. And this map that I'll bring up shows the new range and strike capability that now it's giving Ukraine the opportunity to strike deep within Russian-controlled territory. Now, the release didn't say anything about striking targets within Russian territory, not just Russian-controlled territory, but as we've seen with all Western weapons, there have been so far forbidden to strike targets within Russia. Now, interesting, there is actually a petition to resume asset declarations for officials. Now, what is that? And under Ukrainian law, once a petition reaches 25,000 signatures, the president has to respond. So under the Ukraine law, now Zelensky has to respond to this petition. Now, the Kiev Independent writes, after Russia launched its full-scale invasion on February 2022, the Ukrainian authorities allowed officials not to file electronic asset declarations in the future and shut down all public access to previous declarations. Officials will only have to resume submitting asset declarations within 3 months after the end of the war. Continues saying, civic watchdogs say that Ukraine's asset declaration system, a key pillar of the anti-corruption infrastructure, has been effectively destroyed, with martial law used as its pretext by corrupt officials. This will make all future contests for government jobs meaningless, the watchdogs argue. And, this is something we have seen as a big issue in Ukraine from before the war, during the war, and continuing, is corruption. And this is something that I think that if it buys into that EU membership will be, this needs to be sorted out before that can be seen and before other countries will be willing to take it on. But as I said, there was a lot happening today. That's all I can really get into a video. So look, thank you very much. Look after yourselves. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.